I didn't get an invitation to my sister's wedding, so I went on a trip. Sorry, dear. This event is only for the closest people, my mother said. When the wedding was canceled because of a debt, the whole family started begging me, but it was too late. You ever feel like your own family built a life and left you out of it on purpose? That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Caleb, and the day I found out I wasn't invited to my own sister's wedding, because it's just family, dear, was the day I realized how easily they could erase me. What came next? Well, let's just say the family golden girl didn't make it to the altar. Not because I did anything, but because I finally chose not to. Stick around, because this isn't just a story about being excluded. It's about the power of saying no when they only come calling to clean up the mess they made. Now, let's go back to where it all started. You always know when a phone call is going to change everything. It's in the pause before your mother speaks, in the chill behind her words. Mine came on a gray Tuesday morning in Chicago, just as I was shrugging on my jacket for work. The city was still waking up, the sound of traffic a low hum outside my apartment window. Caleb, she said, her voice clipped and cool, distant. You're not invited to Amanda's wedding. It's just family, dear. Just family. I swear I forgot how to breathe. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wilting succulent on my windowsill. It didn't make sense. I was family. I was Amanda's only brother. Her younger brother, the one who'd helped her move into 3 different apartments, the one who'd co-signed her first car loan, the one who'd sat up with her all night when she didn't get into her first-choice college. But that one word, it sliced me right out of the picture. What? I finally choked out, my voice barely a whisper. You're saying I'm not family? It's complicated, she said, and the non-answer was more insulting than an actual reason. We've decided to keep it intimate. Like they were a team, like I was a stranger listening in on a private decision. Before I could even process what to say next, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was the family group chat. And there it was, a new message from Amanda, my golden child older sister. Her message was barely a sentence, dropped into the chat like a public decree. Hey everyone, just confirming the guest list is tight for the wedding. No extras. Hope you understand. Can't wait to celebrate with our nearest and dearest. No extras. The pit in my stomach turned to ice. My name wasn't even mentioned. Not a single direct word to me, just a casual public announcement that I didn't make the cut. That I didn't belong in the category of nearest and dearest. And just like that, my world shrank. The walls of my small apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like they were pressing in on me. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the worn-out comforter sighing under my weight. I just stared at the text on my phone screen. They weren't even ashamed. No fight, no apology, just a quiet, brutal dismissal. The worst part? A small, tired part of me almost expected it. You see, I'd always been the quiet one, the afterthought. Amanda got the cheers, the toasts, the spotlight. I got the side glances and the silence. When she graduated with honors, we had a lavish dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. When I got a major promotion at my graphic design firm last year, my mom forgot to call. Now I was being erased from the biggest day of her life. They were planning a wedding without me. A huge celebration at that grand country club in the suburbs, with fairy lights and a string quartet and champagne flowing like water. I could almost hear the clinking glasses and the soft music. Every cousin, every neighbor, even their pampered little dog would be there. Just not me. Not the brother who was apparently just an extra. I sat there until my coffee went cold, my heart thudding a dull, heavy rhythm in my ears. It wasn't just about the wedding. Not really. It was about a lifetime of being put second. No last. So, I did what any rational man might do when his family casually cuts him out of their lives. I got quiet. I got still. And I started planning. Not revenge. Not yet. Just distance. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat on my couch in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across my living room wall. Ghosts of lives I wasn't living. I didn't cry. I didn't punch a pillow. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a cold, hard ache that settled deep in my bones. It was the ache of realization. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was just the final, undeniable confirmation of a lifetime of being invisible. My mind kept drifting back. I saw myself at 10 years old, helping Amanda with her science project until 2 a.m., only for her to present it as her own work and get all the credit. I saw myself at 18, putting my own plans for a summer trip on hold to help my parents fix up the house because Amanda had decided, on a whim, to host a massive graduation party there. I was the family handyman, the tech support, the emergency contact, the reliable one, the one you called when something was broken. But I was never the one you called just to celebrate. The memory that stung the most, though, was about my Aunt Beatrice. She was my dad's sister, the only person in the family who ever really saw me. She was an artist, a free spirit who lived in a cluttered little house by the lake and always smelled like turpentine and cinnamon. She'd ruffle my hair and say, "Caleb, honey, don't you let them grind you down. You've got a fire in you they're too blind to see." When she passed away 2 years ago, it felt like the only light in the family had gone out. In her will, she'd left me a small but significant inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to be a safety net, enough to maybe start my own small design business someday. She'd written in the letter that came with it, "This is for your dream, Caleb, not theirs, yours." About 6 months after the funeral, my parents had sat me down in the living room. My dad looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight in his armchair. My mother did the talking, her voice smooth and reasonable. "Caleb, honey," she'd started. "We know you were planning on investing that money from Beatrice's estate, but your father and I have run into a little trouble. Just some unexpected expenses. It's nothing serious, but we were wondering if we could borrow it. Just for a little while. We'll pay you back with interest, of course. It would be a huge help to us. We're family, after all." I remembered the knot in my stomach. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like Aunt Beatrice, screamed, "No." But I looked at my parents' anxious faces, and the lifetime of conditioning kicked in. I was the good son, the reliable one, so I said yes. I transferred the entire amount to their account the next day. They promised it was just to cover some outstanding debt, and that I'd have it back long before Amanda's wedding planning even started. I never saw a penny of it again. And now, sitting in the dark of my apartment, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The dismissal, the coldness, the casual cruelty of it all. It wasn't just that they didn't value me. It was that they had already gotten what they needed from me. My aunt's legacy, her final gift meant for my future, had been cashed in to fund theirs. I was no longer useful, so I was disposable. An extra. The anger that started to burn in my chest was a different kind of anger than I'd ever felt before. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and sharp, like a shard of glass. It was the anger of a man who finally understood that the love he'd been giving so freely his entire life had never been returned. It had just been withdrawn like from a bank account, and the account was now empty. I stood up, the decision finally solidifying. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to beg for a place at their table. I was going to do what Aunt Beatrice always told me to do. I was going to find my own fire. And to do that, I had to leave. Not to punish them, but to finally save myself. Instead of opening a browser to look for flights, I found myself looking at the Amtrak schedule. A flight felt too fast, too efficient. A jarring leap from one life to another. I needed time. I needed to feel the distance grow, mile by painstaking mile. A train, on the other hand, that felt right. A slow, deliberate journey into the unknown. I saw a route from Chicago down to Austin, Texas. I'd never been to Austin. I knew almost nothing about it, other than that it was supposed to have good music and be weird. Weird sounded good. Weird sounded like the opposite of my perfectly curated, painfully predictable family. I booked a one-way ticket in a sleeper car, leaving the next evening. The next 24 hours were a blur of motion. I called my boss at the design firm, a stern but fair woman named Ms. Albright. I told her there was a family emergency and I needed to take an indefinite leave of absence. I was good at my job and I had a lot of vacation time saved up. To my surprise, she just said, "Take the time you need, Caleb. Your job will be here when you get back. It was more kindness than I'd received from my own family in a decade. Then came the packing. Felt strange. I wasn't packing for a vacation. I was packing for an escape. What do you take when you're leaving a life behind? I started with the essentials: jeans, t-shirts, my laptop. But then my hands paused over the framed photos on my dresser. One of me and Amanda as kids, grinning with missing teeth. One of the whole family at a Christmas gathering a few years back. I looked at the smiling faces, a perfect portrait of a happy family. Perfect lie. I took the photos out of their frames, slid them into a manila envelope, and tucked them into the bottom of my suitcase. I didn't know why. I wasn't ready to look at them, but I wasn't ready to throw them away either. The last thing I packed was a small, worn wooden box. Inside was the letter from Aunt Beatrice and a photo of her, laughing, with paint smudged on her cheek. This I kept at the top of my bag. Standing in the grand hall of Union Station the next evening felt surreal. The air buzzed with the energy of 100 different journeys beginning and ending. People were hugging, crying, laughing. I was utterly alone, an anonymous figure in the crowd. And for the first time, that anonymity felt like a shield, not a punishment. As I found my seat on the train, I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over the power button. No new messages. No missed calls. They hadn't even noticed I was gone. I pressed the button, held it down, and watched the screen go black. The finality of it sent a jolt through me. Part terror, part exhilaration. The train pulled out of the station with a low groan, and I watched the Chicago skyline, my home, shrink in the distance until it was just a string of glittering lights. I spent the next 2 days in a strange, peaceful limbo. I ate my meals in the dining car, making small talk with strangers, a retired couple heading to see their grandkids, a young musician on her way to a festival. They didn't know my story, didn't know the weight I was carrying. To them, I was just a man on a train. I read a book, listened to music, and mostly just stared out the window. I watched the flat plains of Illinois give way to the rolling hills of Missouri, then the wide open spaces of Arkansas. The country was so vast, so full of lives I couldn't even imagine. It made my own family drama feel small, insignificant. As the train rumbled south, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen, 1 mile at a time. I was heading into the unknown, with no plan and no one waiting for me. And I had never felt more alive. Austin greeted me not with a bang, but with a warm, humid embrace. I stepped off the train feeling stiff and disoriented, the Texas sun bright in my eyes. The city hummed with a different kind of energy than Chicago, slower, more laid back, with an undercurrent of something creative and untamed. I got a taxi and gave the driver the address of a short-term rental I'd found online, a small garage apartment in a quiet neighborhood south of the river. The first few days were a strange mix of freedom and profound loneliness. I unpacked my few belongings, the silence of the small apartment deafening. I'd walk for hours, exploring the quirky shops on South Congress, wandering along the greenbelt that snaked through the city, and eating tacos from food trucks until I thought I'd burst. I was doing all the things I'd never had time for back home, but the quiet moments were hard. In the evenings, I'd sit on the small porch of my apartment, listening to the cicadas buzz, and the weight of what I'd left behind would press down on me. I was free, but I was adrift. About a week in, determined to break out of my shell, I forced myself to go to a local bar that was known for its live music. It was a small, divey place called the Continental Club, packed with people and vibrating with the sound of a blues guitar. I found a spot at the corner of the bar, ordered a beer, and tried to just blend into the background. That's when I met Leo. He slid onto the stool next to me, nodding at the bartender. He was maybe in his 40s, with kind eyes, a scruffy beard, and hands that looked like they knew their way around a block of wood. "They're good, aren't they?" he said, gesturing with his beer bottle toward the stage. His voice was a low, pleasant rumble. "Yeah, they are," I said, surprised at how rusty my own voice sounded. We fell into an easy conversation. He told me he owned a small custom woodworking shop nearby and played guitar in a band on the weekends. He asked what brought me to Austin, I gave him the vague answer I'd been practicing. Just needed a change of scenery. He took a slow sip of his beer and looked at me, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding. Austin's a good place for that, he said. It's a city that's good at letting you start over. He didn't push for details. He didn't pry. He just accepted my answer, and in that moment, I felt a small sliver of the tension in my shoulders release. We talked for the rest of the night about music, about the pros and cons of different types of wood finish, about the ridiculous price of rent in the city. It was the first real conversation I'd had in a week. As the bar was closing, he scribbled something on a napkin. Hey, a few of us are having a barbecue at my place on Saturday. Nothing fancy, just burgers and bad jokes. You should come. He slid the napkin across the bar. It had an address and a crudely drawn map on it. For a second, the old Caleb wanted to say no. The voice in my head, the one that sounded like my mother, whispered, "Don't impose. You'll be awkward. You don't belong." But another voice, a newer, quieter one, whispered back, "Say yes. Just this once." "I'd like that," I said. "Thanks." On Saturday, I stood outside his house, a modest bungalow with a sprawling oak tree in the front yard, clutching a six-pack of beer like it was a shield. I almost turned around and left. But then the front door swung open, and Leo waved me in with a big grin. The backyard was full of people. A wonderfully motley crew of artists, musicians, and craftsmen. Music was playing from a portable speaker, and the air smelled like grilled meat and freshly cut grass. No one asked me what I did for a living or where I went to college. They just asked my name, handed me a plate, and included me in their conversations. Leo introduced me simply as Caleb, my new buddy. Not the guy from Chicago. Not the guy who looks like he's running from something. Just Caleb. I talked to a woman who made pottery, a guy who restored vintage motorcycles, and a couple who ran a small organic farm. I laughed more than I had in months. For a few hours, I wasn't the invisible brother or the disappointing son. I was just a guy at a barbecue on a sunny Texas afternoon. As I drove back to my little apartment that night, I realized something profound. These strangers had shown me more genuine warmth and acceptance in a single afternoon than my own family had in years. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to build a new life, whether I'd intended to or not. After that barbecue, something shifted in me. I started to feel less like a man in hiding and more like a man exploring. Leo and I started hanging out regularly. He'd show me around his workshop, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and varnish. I'd always had a knack for drawing and design, and I found myself fascinated by the process of turning a raw piece of wood into something beautiful and functional. In return, I helped him design a new logo for his business. It felt good to be creating something again, to be useful in a way that was appreciated. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived in Austin, I was sitting in a coffee shop, sketching out some ideas in a notebook. On a whim, I decided to turn my phone back on. I wasn't looking for messages from my family. I'd made my peace with the silence. It was more like a morbid curiosity, like wanting to peek behind the curtain of the perfect life they were building without me. I reconnected to the Wi-Fi and opened the family group chat. At first glance, it was exactly what I expected. The chat was a flurry of exclamation points and heart emojis. Amanda had posted a photo of her and her fiancé, Derek, clinking champagne glasses. The caption read, "Final venue deposit is IN. It's really happening. #wedding bells." The replies flooded in. My mom sent a string of hearts. My dad posted a thumbs-up emoji. But as I scrolled, I started to notice things, small details that a graphic designer's eye is trained to catch. My mother's messages were frantic. She was posting too often, double texting, replying to her own messages with corrections. It felt less like excitement and more like nervous energy. Then I saw a photo my dad had posted. It was a candid shot of Amanda and Derek laughing on the patio. The caption was a cheesy, "Let the good times roll," but it was the background that caught my attention. Through the open patio door, I could see a whiteboard propped on a chair in the dining room. I zoomed in. The image was blurry, but I could just make out scribbles of numbers. figures that had been crossed out, and one word, circled in red, deadline. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The old Caleb would have replied instantly, "Hey, what's the deadline for? Everything okay?" But the new Caleb just watched. A few days later, Derek posted a photo of himself. He was standing on what looked like a tropical beach, holding a coconut drink. The caption was slick and a little too perfect. Had to take a surprise business trip to the Cayman Islands. Working hard, but someone's got to pay for this wedding, right? Winky face. See you soon. My love at Amanda. Something about the photo felt off. The lighting on him seemed slightly different from the background. The edge around his shoulder was just a little too sharp. I downloaded the image and opened it in a design program on my laptop. Took me less than 5 minutes to confirm my suspicion. It was a clumsy Photoshop job. The background was a stock photo of a beach. I had no idea where Derek really was, but he wasn't in the Cayman Islands. Why would he lie about that? The Cayman Islands, a notorious tax haven. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just about a fancy wedding anymore. Something was wrong. My suspicions solidified when I saw the last photo posted just that morning. It was a group shot from a small pre-wedding party at my parents' house. Everyone was smiling, but their smiles were brittle. My mother was holding her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. And on the wall behind them, almost out of frame, was a calendar. The date, a Friday 2 weeks from then, was circled. And underneath it, in my mother's precise handwriting, were 2 words. Loan due. It all started to click together in a very ugly way. The frantic energy, the whiteboard, the faked photo, the looming debt. They weren't celebrating. They were scrambling. And I had a terrible feeling I knew who they were expecting to bail them out. The silence on my phone was about to end. And it was going to be loud. I was right. The storm broke the next morning. It started with a single text from my mother. "Caleb, dear. Just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. We're all thinking of you." It was the classic opening. The gentle lure before the hook. I didn't reply. I just stared at it, my coffee growing cold in my hands. An hour later, another text. "I know you're probably busy, but we really need to talk. It's important." Then, a few hours after that, the pretense of politeness vanished. "Caleb, this isn't funny anymore. You need to call me. Now." And then, the phone started ringing. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. It immediately rang again. My father. I let that go too. Then, a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. A text from Amanda popped up. "Can you be an adult for once and call us back? This is serious." The barrage was relentless. Texts, calls, voicemails, one after another. It was a coordinated assault, a digital siege. My little apartment in Austin, my safe haven, suddenly felt invaded. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall, but I knew I had to see this through. I had to know exactly what they wanted. Then came the text that laid it all bare. It was from my dad. "The venue needs the final payment by Friday, or they cancel the entire event. We are short. Your mother and I can't get another loan. We need you to co-sign. It's the only way." There it was. The real reason. Not concern, not love, not a desire for reconciliation. It was a transaction. They needed my good credit. The credit score I had worked so hard to build. Staying out of debt. Living within my means. Being the responsible one my entire adult life. It wasn't me they wanted. It was my financial stability. It was my name on a dotted line. The anger I felt was so intense it made my hands shake. All of it, the exclusion, the just family excuse, the public dismissal, it was all a lie to cover this up. They hadn't pushed me away because they wanted an intimate wedding. They'd pushed me away hoping I wouldn't be around to ask questions about the money. They expected me to be the good, reliable son who would come running the moment they sounded the alarm. No questions asked. I didn't respond. I put my phone on silent and went to Leo's workshop. I needed to do something with my hands, to feel the solid reality of wood and tools. I spent the afternoon sanding a large slab of oak, the repetitive motion a strange comfort. But I couldn't escape the buzzing in my pocket, the constant vibration of their desperation. That night, I finally listened to the voicemails. My mother's voice was the worst. It went from sweet to sharp in seconds. Voicemail 1. Caleb, darling, it's your mother. We're just trying to figure things out for the wedding. It's not fair for you to disappear like this. We've always supported you. Voicemail 2. Okay. I don't know what game you're playing, but it needs to stop. Your sister's happiness is on the line here. It's one signature. You have the best credit in the family. The bank already flagged the application without you on it. And then my father's. His voice was low, edged with a disappointment I knew was completely manufactured. I know you're upset about the wedding stuff, but this is your family, Caleb. We need you. Amanda needs you. We'll make it up to you, I promise. But right now, we need that signature. I stared out my window at the Austin night. The city was alive with lights and music. A world away from the suffocating drama they were trying to pull me back into. They'd spent a lifetime making me feel small and invisible. But now, in my absence, I had all the power. And for the first time in my life, I was going to use it, by doing nothing at all. I sipped my beer slowly and deleted every voicemail, one by one. I didn't answer the texts. I didn't return the calls. I was finally subtracting myself from their equation. And that kind of math felt like freedom. The next 2 days were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. They tried everything. Guilt, anger, feigned concern. Amanda sent me a picture of her crying, mascara running down her cheeks with the caption, "Is this what you want?" My father sent a long, rambling text about family duty and how disappointed my grandparents would be. It was all noise. I had built a wall around myself, and their words just bounced off it. I was at Leo's workshop, helping him install some new shelves, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a call or a text, but a voicemail from a number I recognized. My cousin, Sarah. That was odd. Sarah and I were friendly, but we rarely talked on the phone. I stepped outside into the alley behind the workshop, the smell of sawdust and grilled meat from a nearby restaurant hanging in the air. I pressed play, but it wasn't Sarah's voice. It was my mother's. She was frantic, her voice high-pitched with panic. She must have been trying to call my father, whose name is Richard, and accidentally dialed Sarah instead, leaving a long, rambling voicemail on her machine. Sarah, bless her heart, must have realized what it was and forwarded it to me immediately. Richard, I don't know what to do. He's not answering. Sarah just called asking if everything was okay because Amanda seems so stressed. And I had to lie to her. I had to lie to my own niece. There was a pause, a shaky breath. If he doesn't call back today, we'll have to tell the venue we can't make the payment. Derek is getting suspicious. He keeps asking to see the bank statements. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, and this was the part that made the blood in my veins run cold. Richard, what are we going to do? The money from Beatrice's inheritance. It's all gone. Every last cent. We used it for the deposit and all the vendors. I told you this was too much. I told you we couldn't afford this lifestyle Derek is used to. If Caleb doesn't co-sign this new loan, it's not just the wedding that's gone. It's everything. Derek will find out we're broke. He'll find out we spent Caleb's money. He'll leave her, Richard. He'll leave her and we'll lose the house. This wasn't supposed to happen. Caleb was supposed to just sign. He always does. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the pavement. I leaned against the brick wall, my legs suddenly weak. It wasn't a loan. They hadn't borrowed my inheritance. They had spent it, stolen it. They had taken the one thing my beloved aunt had left just for me, her legacy, my future, and they had burned it on a pyre of floral arrangements and champagne fountains for my sister's sham wedding. The new loan they were so desperate for me to sign wasn't just to pay for the rest of the wedding. It was to cover up their crime. They needed new money to plug the hole left by my money. They were trying to make me the victim and accomplice in their own fraud. The cold anger I'd been feeling for weeks was suddenly white-hot. This went beyond being excluded or unloved. This was a betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it felt like it had ripped a hole in the fabric of my reality. They hadn't just erased me from a wedding. They had tried to erase my future. I picked up my phone, my hand steady now with a terrible, newfound clarity. I thought about calling them back. I thought about screaming, about demanding, about threatening them with a lawyer. But I didn't, because I realized, in that moment, that the worst thing I could possibly do to them was exactly what I was already doing. Nothing. Their carefully constructed house of cards was teetering on the edge of collapse, and I was about to let it fall. The silence from my end was absolute. And in that silence, their world came crashing down. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to sit back and watch the inevitable happen. I followed the fallout, not with satisfaction, but with the detached interest of someone watching the final act of a tragedy they already knew the ending to. The first domino fell on Friday, the day the final payment for the venue was due. That evening, a new message appeared in the group chat. It wasn't from my parents or Amanda. It was from an aunt who posted a screenshot of a public Facebook post from the country club. Due to a last-minute cancellation, our grand ballroom is now available on Saturday, October 25th. Please contact our event coordinator for booking inquiries. It was Amanda's wedding date. The cancellation was official, and it was public. The chat, which had been buzzing with their frantic, one-sided messages to me, went completely silent. It was a digital tombstone. The next day, the real chaos began. My cousin Sarah, who had become my reluctant informant, texted me directly. "Caleb, I don't know what's going on, but it's bad. Uncle Richard called Dad this morning, asking for money. A lot of money." Dad said no. Then I saw on Instagram that all of Derek's groomsmen have canceled their hotel rooms. But the final, spectacular implosion came from Amanda herself. Her Instagram, once a curated shrine to her perfect life with her perfect fiancé, became a war zone. Derek had apparently vanished, blocked her on all platforms, disappeared without a word. In her grief and fury, Amanda posted a long, rambling story, accusing Derek of being a con artist, a fraud who had taken advantage of her and her family. It was a bold, if foolish, move, because Derek, it turned out, wasn't the type to go quietly. One of his cousins, who was apparently tired of the family drama, slid into the comments section of a local wedding blog that had picked up the story. The comment was brutal. "Just to be clear, my cousin Derek left because he found out his wealthy fiancé's family was completely bankrupt. They had maxed out every credit card and taken out secret loans to pay for the wedding. They even stole her brother's inheritance money. Derek isn't a con artist. He just has better sense than to marry into a family of liars and thieves." The comment was a nuclear bomb. It was screenshotted and shared, spreading through our extended family and social circles like wildfire. The whole sordid story was out. The stolen money, the mountain of debt, the lies. My family wasn't just broke. They were a public spectacle, a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties. I was sitting on my porch, sipping a cold beer, when I read that comment. A part of me should have felt a vindictive thrill. A part of me should have felt joy at their public humiliation. But I didn't. I just felt tired and empty. This wasn't a victory. It was just the sad, pathetic end to a story that had been written long before I left Chicago. Later that evening, Sarah texted me one last time. "They're losing the house, Caleb. The bank is foreclosing. Dad said Mom and Dad are blaming you for everything. For not signing the loan. For not being there to fix it." I read the message and took a long sip of my beer. Let them blame me. Let them scream my name into the void. It didn't matter anymore. They had built their gilded cage, and now they were trapped inside it. I, on the other hand, was free. I turned my phone off, leaned my head back, and listened to the sound of the Austin nightlife starting to wake up. It was the sound of my life, a life that was finally completely my own. You would think that after such a catastrophic public humiliation, they would retreat into a quiet shame. You would think there might be a glimmer of self-reflection, a moment of recognition for the roles they played in their own downfall. But you would be wrong. When you spend your entire life believing you are the main character, it's impossible to accept that you might actually be the villain. So they did the only thing they knew how to do. They found someone else to blame. And that someone was me. A week after the wedding imploded, after the dust had settled and their ruin was complete, My phone lit up with one final voicemail. It was from my mother. I hesitated before playing it. I knew it wouldn't be an apology. I knew it wouldn't be an explanation. It would be an attack. But I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the final, desperate gasp of their delusion. I pressed play. Her voice was no longer frantic or pleading. It was cold. It was hard as steel. It was a voice I had never heard before, and it was terrifying in its venom. "Well, Caleb, I hope you're happy." The words dripped with a sarcasm so bitter it could have curdled milk. "I hope you're enjoying your little vacation, your little tantrum, while your family falls apart. Amanda is devastated. She's lost everything. Her fiancé, her home, her reputation. All because of you. Derek's family is telling everyone we're criminals. The bank is taking our home. Your father's health is failing from the stress. This is what you wanted, isn't it? This is on you, Caleb." She took a sharp breath, and I could picture her standing in the now empty living room, her posture rigid with self-righteous fury. All you had to do was answer the phone. One signature. One simple act of family loyalty. That's all it would have taken. But no. You had to make a point. You had to be selfish. You couldn't stand to see your sister have one day, just one day. That was all about her. You've always been jealous of her. And now you've destroyed her life to make yourself feel powerful. She paused, and for a moment, I thought she was finished. But then came the final, killing blow. "I hope it was worth it. I hope you feel good about what you've done. You are no longer my son." Click. The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of my quiet Austin apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. The silence she left behind was heavier than any of her words. It was surreal, because the only thing I had done was nothing. I didn't destroy the wedding. I didn't lie to vendors or take out loans I couldn't afford. I didn't design a dream around entitlement. I simply didn't come running when they snapped their fingers. And that absence, that simple act of self-preservation, was enough for them to brand me a monster. It was enough for my own mother to disown me. It should have crushed me. The younger Caleb would have shattered into a million pieces. But as I stood there, I felt nothing. The guilt, the shame, the desperate need for their approval. It was all gone. It had been burned away in the fire of their betrayal. All that was left was a strange, quiet peace. She hadn't disowned me. She had liberated me. She had cut the final cord, the one I hadn't been strong enough to cut myself. The door was closed, and I would never, ever knock on it again. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. After that final voicemail, a profound silence settled between me and the life I had left behind. And in that silence, I began to build. The anger and the hurt didn't just disappear overnight, but I decided I couldn't let them be the foundation of my new life. Instead, I poured all of that energy into work. Leo became more than just a friend. He became a mentor. I spent every spare moment I had at his workshop, absorbing everything I could. I started sketching again, not just logos and websites, but furniture. I found that I had a good eye for clean lines and functional design, a skill honed by years of graphic design but now applied to a tangible, three-dimensional world. One afternoon, I showed Leo a design I'd made for a simple, modern coffee table. He studied the sketch for a long moment, then looked at me and said, "You should make this." "I don't know how," I admitted. "I'll teach you," he said simply. And he did. He taught me how to choose the right wood, how to measure twice and cut once, how to use a planer and a joiner and a sander. My hands, once accustomed only to a mouse and keyboard, grew calloused and strong. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. In the scent of fresh sawdust, in the hum of the machinery, I found a kind of meditation. I was taking something raw and chaotic and turning it into something beautiful and ordered. I was doing for a piece of wood what I was trying to do for my own life. After a few months, with Leo's encouragement, I took a leap of faith. I took the small amount of savings I had left and rented a tiny corner of a shared workshop space. I bought a few second-hand tools and officially started my own small business. I built that coffee table from my sketch, then a set of bookshelves, then a dining table. I created a simple website to showcase my work, using the design skills I already had. I'll never forget my first sale. It was to a young couple who had just bought their first home. They saw a photo of the coffee table online and came to the workshop to see it. They walked around it, ran their hands over the smooth, oiled surface of the walnut, and their eyes lit up. "It's perfect," the woman said. "It's exactly what we've been looking for." The feeling of seeing something I had created with my own two hands go into someone's home, to become a part of their life. It was a feeling I had never experienced before. It was 1,000 times more satisfying than any hollow praise I had ever received from my family. My little business started to grow, slowly at first, then all at once. Word of mouth spread. An Austin design blog featured one of my pieces. Orders started coming in faster than I could keep up. I was working 12-hour days, exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely mine. My worth wasn't being determined by my usefulness to others. It was being forged by my own creativity and hard work. I was no longer the afterthought, the invisible man. I was Caleb, the furniture maker, and I was just getting started. A little over a year had passed since I'd left Chicago. My life in Austin had taken root in ways I never could have imagined. My furniture business was thriving. I'd even hired my first part-time employee to help with sanding and finishing. The little garage apartment felt too small, and I was in the process of looking for a place of my own, maybe even a small house with a yard. The ghosts of my past life had faded, becoming distant, muffled echoes. But there was one last piece of unfinished business. My apartment in Chicago. I had been subletting it to a friend of a friend, but the lease was finally up. I needed to go back, clear out my remaining belongings, and officially close that chapter. The thought of returning filled me with a low hum of anxiety, but I knew I had to do it. I flew back on a Tuesday, planning to be in and out in less than 48 hours. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I had no intention of seeing my family. My plan was to pack, hire movers to put my things in storage, and be on a plane back to Austin before anyone even knew I was in town. Of course, that's not how it happened. I was in the middle of packing up my kitchen, wrapping plates in newspaper, when the buzzer for the apartment building rang. It wasn't a quick buzz. It was a long, sustained, desperate press. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, who it was. I ignored it. A minute later, it rang again. And again. Finally, my phone started vibrating. A text from my cousin Sarah. "Caleb, your mom knows you're in town. I don't know how. She's on her way to your apartment with your dad and Amanda. I'm so sorry." My first instinct was to run, to lock the door and pretend I wasn't there. But then a strange calm settled over me. No, I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to hide. I finished wrapping the plate in my hand, placed it carefully in the box, and waited. The knock on the door was timid at first, then more insistent. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. The three of them stood there in the drab hallway, looking smaller and more worn out than I remembered. My father had lost weight, his suit hanging off his shoulders. My mother's face was etched with lines of stress that weren't there before. And Amanda looked defeated. The polished, golden girl glow was gone, replaced by a dull, tired resentment. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stared at me, as if they were looking at a ghost. My mother was the first to find her voice. She wrung her hands, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling slightly. We made mistakes. Terrible ones. I thought I was doing what was best for the family." My father cleared his throat. "We were wrong, son. We should have never put you in that position." Amanda just stared at the floor, silent. I said nothing. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, and waited. Then came the real reason they were there. It always came, eventually. "The thing is, Caleb," my mother continued, her voice dropping, We're still in a lot of trouble. The debt. It's worse than we admitted. Your father's pension is gone. We were just wondering, now that you're doing so well, if you could consider helping us. Just a small loan to get us back on our feet. And there it was. The apology was just a preface to the ask. Some things never change. I looked at their faces, a mixture of shame and hope, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity. Just a profound and final sense of disconnect. They were strangers to me now, relics from a life I no longer lived. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped back from the doorway. For a split second, a flicker of hope lit up their eyes. They thought I was letting them in. But instead, I reached for the door. I looked each of them in the eye one last time, and then I gently closed the door in their faces. I didn't slam it. It was a soft, quiet click. The sound of an ending. I heard my mother let out a small, wounded gasp on the other side. I turned the deadbolt, leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, and closed my eyes. It was over. Leaving Chicago for the second time felt completely different from the first. There was no fear, no frantic escape. This time it was a calm, deliberate departure. As the plane took off, I didn't look back. I looked forward, toward the life I had built for myself. A life forged not from obligation, but from passion and purpose. Returning to Austin felt like coming home. The warm air, the vibrant energy of the city, the familiar face of Leo waiting for me at the airport. It all wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. I told him what had happened, how my family had shown up, how I had closed the door. He didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good for you, man. You did the right thing." And I knew he was right. The months that followed were some of the best of my life. I finally moved out of the garage apartment and bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, with a big backyard and a detached garage that I immediately started converting into my own personal workshop. My business, which I had officially named Beatrice's Legacy Woodworking, continued to grow. I hired another full-time employee and started taking on larger, more ambitious commissions. My pieces were getting noticed, featured in more design magazines and blogs. I was making a name for myself, not as someone's brother or son, but as Caleb, a craftsman. But the most significant change wasn't in my career. It was in my heart. One evening, Leo dragged me out to a gallery opening for a local painter. And that's where I met Maya. She was the artist, a vibrant, funny, and incredibly talented woman with paint splatters on her jeans and a laugh that could fill a room. We started talking and didn't stop all night. Our relationship was everything my past relationships and my family dynamic had not been. It was built on mutual respect, honesty, and support. She celebrated my successes as if they were her own, and I did the same for her. When I had a bad day, she didn't try to fix it. She just sat with me. She saw me, the real me, and loved me for it. A year later, we moved in together, her colorful canvases filling the walls of the little house I had bought, making it feel even more like a home. One afternoon, I received a long email from my cousin Sarah. It was the first I'd heard from anyone in the family since that day in the hallway. She told me she was getting married and wanted to let me know, but she understood if I didn't want to be involved. Tucked at the end of the email was an update. It was brief and to the point. "I know you probably don't care," she wrote, "but I thought you should know. Your parents finally lost the house. They're renting a small apartment across town. And Amanda, she's divorced. It turned out Derek was involved in some shady business deals, and he left her with a mountain of legal bills. She had to declare bankruptcy." I read the email and I waited for a feeling to hit me. Sadness, anger, maybe even a little bit of satisfaction. But nothing came. It was like reading a news story about people I used to know a long time ago. Their lives, their dramas, their consequences. They had nothing to do with me anymore. I wrote back to Sarah, congratulating her on her wedding and politely declining the invitation, wishing her all the best. Then I closed my laptop, walked out into my workshop, and got back to work, the familiar scent of cedar and sawdust filling the air. I was home. I never sought out news about my family, but sometimes it found its way to me anyway, like driftwood washing up on a shore. Through the occasional cautious email from Sarah, I pieced together the slow, grinding reality of their new lives. The picture she painted was bleak. My parents, who had once lived in a sprawling suburban house filled with things they couldn't afford, were now crammed into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex by the expressway. The constant rumble of traffic was the new soundtrack to their lives. The grand furniture they had been so proud of had been sold off for pennies on the dollar to pay legal fees. All that was left were the dregs, the cheap replacements that served as a constant reminder of how far they had fallen. According to Sarah, they had become bitter, isolated people. My father, whose identity had been so tied to providing a certain lifestyle, had shriveled. He spent most of his days watching television, his health declining rapidly from the stress and inactivity. My mother, once the queen of her social circle, now rarely left the apartment. She had lost all her fair-weather friends when the money disappeared. What was most telling, Sarah wrote, was that they never once took responsibility for their actions. In their minds, they were the victims. They were victims of a bad economy, victims of a deceitful son-in-law, and most of all, victims of their ungrateful son who had abandoned them in their time of need. They had learned nothing. Their narrative was set in stone, and they would cling to it until the very end. They never mentioned the inheritance money again. It was as if it had never existed. They had rewritten their own history to absolve themselves of their greatest sin. The relationship between them and Amanda had also fractured. The shared crisis didn't bring them closer. It just created a toxic feedback loop of blame and resentment. They blamed her for choosing Derek, for being so demanding, for pushing them into financial ruin. She, in turn, blamed them for their poor financial planning and for not being able to provide the life she felt she was entitled to. The family unit I had once desperately wanted to be a part of had curdled into a miserable trio of resentful roommates, trapped together by their shared failure. I didn't rejoice in this news. There was no sense of victory. It was just sad. It was the logical conclusion of a life built on a foundation of image over substance, of entitlement over integrity. They had chased a fantasy, and when it evaporated, they had nothing real to fall back on. Not financial security, not honest relationships, not even their own self-respect. They had sown the wind, and now they were reaping the whirlwind. Their punishment wasn't some grand, dramatic event. It was the slow, quiet, day-in and day-out misery of living with the consequences of their own choices. And there was no one left to bail them out. The story of Amanda's fall was perhaps the most dramatic. She had built her entire identity around being the golden child, the successful one, the one who was destined for a life of luxury and ease. When that life was snatched away, she had nothing left. Her divorce from Derek had been a messy, public affair. He had fled the country, leaving her to deal with the fallout of his shady business dealings. She was named in a lawsuit and had to use what little money she had left to hire a lawyer just to clear her name. She had to sell her car, her designer clothes, everything. The bankruptcy left a permanent stain on her record, making it impossible for her to get so much as a credit card. She lost her high-paying marketing job. In a world where image was everything, her tarnished reputation made her unemployable in her field. The friends who had once flocked to her lavish parties disappeared. She was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in a rough part of town and take a job that was, for her, the ultimate humiliation. I found out about it by chance. I was back in Chicago for a furniture expo, one of the biggest in the country. My business had grown to the point where I was being invited to showcase my work on a national stage. It was a huge moment for me, a validation of everything I had worked for. One evening after the show, I was walking back to my hotel and decided to grab a quick bite to eat. I stepped into a generic chain restaurant, the kind of place with sticky menus and fluorescent lighting. And that's when I saw her, Amanda. She was clearing a table, her movements slow and tired. She wore the ill-fitting polyester uniform of the restaurant, a name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face, once so bright and confident, was pale and drawn. She looked 10 years older. She didn't see me. She was just going through the motions, her eyes empty and distant. I stood there for a moment, frozen in the doorway. A flood of conflicting emotions washed over me. Pity, sadness, and a strange, hollow ache for the sister I once had, the one who existed before all the lies and the entitlement took over. I could have walked over to her. I could have said something. But what was there to say? My presence would have only been a source of humiliation for her, a stark reminder of everything she had lost and everything I had gained. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like this. The game was over. I hadn't won. I had just walked off the field. So I turned around and quietly walked out of the restaurant. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd gotten my revenge. I just felt done. The story was finally over. The final chapter had been written not by me, but by the unsparing logic of cause and effect. I walked back to my hotel under the bright city lights. The next day, I would go back to the expo, back to my work, back to my life. I would go back to Maya, to Leo, to my home in Austin. I would go back to the life I had built with my own 2 hands, a life of substance and integrity, a life my Aunt Beatrice would have been proud of. The past was a ghost, and I was finally letting it go. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but your support means the world to me. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? I'd love to read about your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel for more stories. Your support helps more than